They say a house remembers everything. Every whispered prayer, every stifled scream, every soul that walked its halls. But 14 Greystone Manor didn't just remember, it waited. And on the night Eleanor Ashford pushed open its rotting oak door, candle trembling in her frost-bitten hands, the house exhaled a breath it had been holding for 30 years. The flame should have died in that wind. Every law of nature demanded it, but it didn't. And that's when Eleanor knew. Some lights refuse to be extinguished, no matter how desperately the darkness tries to swallow them whole. The inheritance of shadows. The letter had arrived on the worst possible day. Eleanor sat in the cramped attic room she rented above Mrs. Weatherby's bakery, the eviction notice still warm in her other hand, when the solicitor's envelope slipped beneath her door like fate disguised as paper. Her fingers, stained with ink from 14 hours of copying legal documents for 3 shillings, trembled as she broke the red wax seal. Miss Eleanor Ashford, you are hereby notified that you are the sole beneficiary of the estate of Margaretta Ashford, deceased. Aunt Margaretta. The name alone conjured memories Eleanor had spent 15 years trying to bury. The aunt who had taken her in after the fever claimed her parents, only to send her away 3 months later with nothing but a worn carpetbag and eyes that wouldn't meet hers. Eleanor had been 12 then, small for her age, with her mother's dark curls and her father's stubborn chin. She'd asked why, standing in that very hallway of Greystone Manor, but Aunt Margaretta had only pressed a single brass key into her palm and whispered, "Some houses need to stay empty, child. Promise me you'll never return." Eleanor had promised. Children always do when adults use that tone. Now, at 27, with November rain hammering against London's grey streets and winter closing in like a fist, promises seemed as flimsy as the shawl draped across her shoulders. The solicitor's letter promised shelter, an escape from the city that had chewed her up and spat her into poverty. A house, land, the possibility of a life that didn't taste like ash and disappointment. She arrived at Greystone Manor 3 days later, her entire life packed into the same carpetbag she'd left with. The house loomed against the Devon countryside like an accusation, its Victorian Gothic architecture all sharp angles and brooding stonework. Ivy strangled the western wall. Windows stared like empty eye sockets. The garden had gone wild, roses growing savage and untended, their thorns black as iron. The key still fit, of course it did. Eleanor had kept it all these years, though she'd never understood why. Some sentimental stupidity she couldn't quite name. The lock turned with a shriek that sent crows scattering from the roof, and the door swung inward on hinges that wept rust. Darkness pooled inside like liquid. Eleanor's candle, the one she'd bought from a half-blind chandler in the village, the man who'd crossed himself when she mentioned Greystone Manor, cast a weak circle of light that seemed to bend and flex against the threshold. She stepped inside. The house exhaled. It wasn't wind. Wind has a source, a direction. This came from everywhere and nowhere. A breath held too long finally released. The candle flame bent horizontal, streaming backward as if pulled by invisible hands, but it didn't go out. Eleanor watched, transfixed, as the flame defied every natural law she knew, streaming like a pennant in a gale but refusing to extinguish. Then the door slammed behind her, and the darkness became absolute except for that one impossible flame. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs like a prisoner against bars. She forced herself to breathe, to think. The hallway stretched before her, exactly as she remembered. The mahogany paneling, the portraits of stern-faced Ashfords staring from their frames, the grand staircase curving upward into shadows that seemed to writhe and pulse. Dust lay thick as snow over everything, undisturbed except for one set of footprints leading deeper into the house, fresh footprints, made within hours. "Hello?" Her voice sounded small, swallowed almost immediately by the oppressive silence. "Is someone there?" The candle flame suddenly burned bright and clear, illuminating the hallway with startling clarity. In that moment, Eleanor saw them. Dozens of candles mounted in wall sconces, all unlit, their wax stained and melted into grotesque shapes. And on the wall, written in what looked like soot or ash, words that made her blood freeze. She kept the light burning. "Now you must too." Eleanor's rational mind screamed at her to run, to flee back to London's familiar miseries. But something deeper, some thread of stubborn Ashford pride or perhaps simple desperation, rooted her feet to the floor. She had nowhere else to go. The city had broken her slowly, day by grinding day, until she'd become a ghost haunting her own life. At least here, in this house of fear, the threat was honest, visible. She moved forward, following those fresh footprints. Her candle cast dancing shadows that seemed to reach for her with elongated fingers. The house creaked and settled around her, speaking in the language of old wood and older secrets. She passed the drawing room where she'd once played with her aunt's porcelain dolls, now arranged in a circle on the floor as if holding a séance. She passed the library where books had tumbled from their shelves and lay open, their pages covered in frantic handwriting that hadn't been there 15 years ago. The footprints led to the kitchen. Eleanor pushed open the door and stopped. The room was clean, impossibly, immaculately clean. No dust, no decay. The iron stove radiated heat. A kettle whistled softly, and sitting at the scarred wooden table, cup of tea steaming before her, was a woman Eleanor had never seen before. She was perhaps 60, with silver hair pinned in an old-fashioned bun, and eyes the color of storm clouds. She wore a simple gray dress, neat but worn, and her hands, wrapped around the teacup, were covered in small burns, the kind you get from handling candles. "You came," the woman said, her voice carrying the soft burr of Devon. "Margareta said you would, but I wasn't certain." "Stubborn girl," she said, stubborn enough to come back despite the fear, despite the promise. "Who are you?" Eleanor demanded, though her voice shook. "What are you doing in my house? Your house?" The woman's laugh was bitter as burnt coffee. "Oh, child. This house belongs to itself, always has. We're just custodians, keepers of the light." She gestured to Eleanor's candle. "That candle. Look at it. Really look." Eleanor lowered her gaze. The candle had burned for over an hour, through wind and darkness and impossible cold. The wax hadn't diminished, not even a little. The wick stood as tall and straight as when she'd first lit it. "My name is Agnes Thorne," the woman continued. "I was your aunt's companion, I suppose you'd call it. For 30 years we kept the vigil together. But Margareta's gone now, passed on 3 weeks back. And the house, it's been waiting for you." "Waiting for what?" Eleanor's voice emerged as barely a whisper. Agnes stood, moving to the stove. She opened the cast-iron door, and Eleanor gasped. Inside burned not wood or coal, but dozens of candles, their flames united into a brilliant conflagration that filled the kitchen with warmth and light. "This house sits on something old, Miss Ashford. Older than Christianity, older than the Romans who built their roads across these hills. There's a darkness beneath Greystone Manor, something that's been hungry since before men had words for hunger. Your family built this house 5 generations ago, built it as a prison, a cage. But cages need guards, and guards need light." Agnes pulled a candle from her apron pocket, lit it from the stove's collective flame, and held it out to Eleanor. "The darkness feeds on despair, on fear, on the small deaths we die every day. It seeps up through the foundation like damp, looking for cracks, for weaknesses. But light, true light, the kind that refuses to surrender, it holds the darkness back. Your ancestors understood that. They've been tending the flame for generations." "That's insane," Eleanor breathed. But even as she said it, she felt the truth resonating in her bones. She thought of her aunt's haunted eyes, of the way she'd sent Eleanor away right after the child had begun having nightmares about shadows with teeth, about whispers from beneath the floorboards. "Is it?" Agnes's smile was sad. "Is it more insane than a candle that won't burn down? More insane than a house that breathes? You felt it when you came in, didn't you? The exhalation. That's the house settling around you, accepting you. Or perhaps testing you." Eleanor's legs suddenly felt weak. She sank into a chair at the table, setting her impossible candle down between them. "Why me? Why send me away as a child only to call me back now?" "Because children can't bear the weight of it," Agnes said gently. "The vigil requires strength, stubbornness, a will that won't break. Margareta saw that in you, the Ashford spine, but she also saw your innocence. She wanted to give you a chance at a normal life, to escape the duty. But life has a way of bringing us back to where we're meant to be, doesn't it?" Eleanor thought of the eviction notice, the grinding poverty, the endless gray days blurring into gray years. "Some escape," she murmured. "But you survived," Agnes pointed out. "London breaks people every day, but you're still here. Still fighting. That's what the house needs. Not someone who's never known darkness, but someone who's walked through it and kept their light burning." A sound echoed from somewhere above them, a long, low scraping like claws on stone. Agnes didn't even flinch. "It knows you're here," she said calmly. "It's been testing the boundaries since Margareta passed, probing for weaknesses. I'm old, Miss Ashford. My light burns low. I can hold it back for days, maybe weeks, but not forever. The house needs a new keeper, someone young, someone strong, someone who understands what it means to refuse to be extinguished." Eleanor stared at the candle between them, at its steady flame that defied all logic. She thought about the key she'd carried for 15 years, about the promise she'd made and broken simply by stepping through that door. She thought about her parents, dead before she could truly know them. About her aunt, who'd carried this terrible burden alone. About Agnes, this stranger who'd devoted 30 years to holding back the dark. "What happens if I say no?" she asked. "If I leave?" Agnes's face went very still. The candles go out, the darkness rises, and everything within 50 miles becomes a graveyard by spring. The scraping sound came again, closer now, definitely from inside the walls. Eleanor's candle flared brighter, as if responding to her fear with defiance. "How?" Eleanor's voice was steadier than she felt. "How do I do this?" Relief washed over Agnes's weathered features like sunrise. "The same way your aunt did. The same way all the Ashfords have. You tend the light. You keep the candles burning in every room, in every corner where shadow might gather. You walk the halls each night and push back the dark. You learn the house's moods, its weak points, its hungers. And you never, ever let the flame go out." She reached across the table and grasped Eleanor's hand. Her skin was paper-thin, mapped with veins, but her grip was iron. "It won't be easy," Agnes continued. "The darkness is patient. It will whisper to you, show you things, try to convince you that letting go would be such a relief. It will wear faces of people you've lost, voices you remember. It will offer you everything you've ever wanted if you'll just put down the candle, close your eyes, sleep. And if I refuse, then you become like your aunt, like me, like all the Ashford women before you. You become the light that will not go out, no matter how fierce the wind blows." Eleanor looked around the kitchen, at the warmth and clarity here that stood in such stark contrast to the darkness beyond the door. She thought about what Agnes had said, that she'd survived London, survived poverty and loneliness and the slow erosion of hope. She'd survived by being stubborn, by refusing to simply lie down and let the world finish her. Maybe that was practice. Maybe every cold night in that attic, every hour of mind-numbing work, every moment she'd chosen to keep going when giving up would have been so much easier. Maybe it had all been preparing her for this. "Teach me," Eleanor said. "Teach me everything." Agnes's smile transformed her face, years falling away. "We start tonight. The darkness is always strong's. Tea at midnight, when one day dies and another is born. That's when we'll walk the house together, light every candle, seal every shadow. You'll learn the prayers, not Christian prayers, though those don't hurt. Older words, protective words. Your aunt wrote them all down, recorded everything she learned. There are journals, decades of them in the library. They spent the remaining hours of daylight preparing." Agnes showed Eleanor the store of candles in the cellar, thousands of them, in all shapes and sizes, made from wax mixed with salt and herbs whose names Eleanor didn't recognize. She taught her how to light them properly, how to speak the words that would bind their flames to the house's protection. "The candles aren't magic," Agnes explained as they worked. "Or perhaps they are, but not in the way you might think. They're symbols, intentions made manifest. Every candle is a refusal, a declaration that the darkness will not have this space, this moment, this life. That's what gives them power, your will, focused through flame. As the sun set, painting the windows blood red." Agnes led Eleanor through the house room by room. In each space, Eleanor lit candles according to Agnes's instruction. 4 in the corners, 1 in the center, 1 above every doorway. The act became meditative, rhythmic. Light a candle. Speak the words. Move to the next. With each flame kindled, the house seemed to brighten, to breathe easier. But there was one door they didn't open. At the end of the second-floor hallway, a door painted black, its surface covered in symbols that hurt Eleanor's eyes to look at directly. "Not tonight," Agnes said firmly when Eleanor reached for the handle. "That room. That's where it's strongest. The main point of ingress. Margareta kept it sealed, only went in once a month to reinforce the wards. You're not ready for that yet." Eleanor wanted to argue, but the candle in her hand suddenly burned cold, its flame turning blue at the edges. She stepped back, and the flame returned to normal gold. "It knows you're curious," Agnes murmured. "Curiosity is a crack it can exploit. Remember that." They descended to the drawing room as midnight approached. Agnes had built up the fire in the marble fireplace, and dozens of candles turned the space into a cathedral of light. She handed Eleanor a leather-bound journal, its pages covered in her aunt's familiar handwriting. "Read this while I make the midnight rounds," Agnes instructed. "I'll be back within the hour. Stay in the light, don't listen to anything you might hear, and whatever you do, don't let your candle go out." Then she was gone, her footsteps receding up the stairs, leaving Eleanor alone with the journal and the dancing flames. Eleanor opened the book to the first page. The date read September 14th, 1855, 40 years ago. Her aunt's handwriting was younger then, less steady, but the words were clear. "Today I learned that my family's legacy is not fortune or title, but vigilance. The darkness beneath our house is patient, but not intelligent. Not in the way we understand intelligence. It is hunger given form, absence given will. Mother taught me the wards today, showed me how to bind the flames. I am afraid. But I am also an Ashford. We do not run from our duties, no matter how terrible." Eleanor read on, page after page of her aunt's careful documentation. The entry chronicled battles fought in silence, moments when the darkness surged and had to be beaten back with nothing but will and candlelight. Her aunt had written about the loneliness, about watching the world change beyond Greystone Manor's walls while she remained trapped by duty, about the lovers she'd sent away, the children she'd never had, the life she'd sacrificed to keep the darkness caged. But there was also pride in those pages, fierce, stubborn Ashford pride, a sense that this was work that mattered, that every night she kept the light burning was a night thousands of innocent people slept safe in their beds, unaware of the horror kept at bay. A sound made Eleanor look up from the journal. Scraping, scratching, coming from the walls, from beneath the floorboards, from everywhere and nowhere. Her candle flame bent toward her, as if seeking her warmth. Then the whispering began. At first, she thought it was wind through cracks in the old house. But wind doesn't form words, doesn't speak in a voice that sounds exactly like her dead mother's. "Eleanor, darling, why are you frightened? It's only me. I've missed you so much." Eleanor's hand tightened on her candle. She forced herself to remember Agnes's warning. This wasn't her mother. Couldn't be. But the voice was so perfect, so exactly right, down to the slight lisp on the S sounds. "Put down the candle, sweetheart. Come to me. Let me hold you again. Don't you remember how safe you felt in my arms?" Tears burned Eleanor's eyes, but she didn't move. The candle flame grew taller, brighter, as if feeding on her refusal. The voice changed, became her father's deep rumble. "Eleanor, my brave girl. You don't have to be brave anymore. You can rest. Just close your eyes. Let go. We're waiting for you in the dark." "No," Eleanor whispered. Then, stronger, "No. You're not them. You're nothing but darkness wearing their faces." The temperature plummeted. Frost spread across the windows like grasping fingers. The whispers became a chorus, 100 voices she recognized and didn't, all speaking at once, overlapping, pleading, demanding, threatening. But through it all, Eleanor held her candle steady, and the flame did not go out. When Agnes returned, she found Eleanor still sitting in the drawing room, surrounded by guttering candles that had burned down to nubs. Eleanor's face was wet with tears, but her eyes were clear. Her candle, the impossible candle that wouldn't burn down, shone like a star in her steady hand. "You heard them," Agnes said. "It wasn't a question." Eleanor nodded. "They sounded so real. They always do. The darkness learns us, studies us, finds our cracks. But you held." Agnes's smile was proud. You held, and that's everything. As dawn broke over Greystone Manor, painting the windows with gentle gray light, Eleanor felt something shift inside her. The fear hadn't vanished. She suspected it never would entirely, but beneath it, solid as stone, was a growing certainty. She had been prepared for this. Every hardship, every lonely night, every moment she'd refused to break had been forging her into exactly what the house needed: a keeper of the light, an Ashford woman who would not be extinguished, the flame that defies darkness. Winter descended on Greystone Manor like a siege. For 6 weeks Eleanor lived in the strange rhythm Agnes taught her: sleepy. In snatches during the day when the light was strongest, walking the halls each night with her candle, learning to read the house's moods in the creak of its boards and the whisper of its drafts. Agnes remained for the first month, patient and thorough in her instruction. She showed Eleanor how to make the protective candles, mixing melted wax with salt harvested from the sea cliffs 20 miles away, with herbs gathered only during the full moon, with ash from wood that had been struck by lightning. The process was part chemistry, part ritual, and entirely necessary. The ingredients matter, Agnes explained as they worked in the kitchen, but your intention matters more. Every candle you make is an act of defiance. You're binding your will into the wax, declaring that this light will stand against the dark. The darkness can feel it. That's why it fights harder some nights than others. It knows when we've made fresh candles, strengthened our reserves. Eleanor learned quickly. She had to. The darkness tested her every night, probing for weaknesses with the patience of something that had waited centuries and could wait centuries more. It wore different faces, tried different tactics. Sometimes it whispered promises of power, wealth, love, everything she'd never had. Sometimes it showed her visions of London burning, of people she'd known dying in terrible ways, and whispered that she could save them if she'd only open the sealed door, make a bargain, let it free. But Eleanor's time in London had taught her the hollowness of promises, and her Ashford blood gave her the stubbornness to refuse. The night Agnes finally left, Eleanor stood at the door and watched the old woman climb into the hired carriage, a carpet bag much like Eleanor's own clutched in her hands. "Where will you go?" Eleanor asked. Agnes's smile was peaceful, the look of someone whose long burden had finally been lifted. "To the sea. I have a sister in Cornwall I haven't seen in 30 years. I want to sit on the beach and watch the sun rise over water, to sleep through entire nights without listening for scratching in the walls, to be old without also being exhausted." "Thank you," Eleanor said, meaning it with every fiber of her being, for staying, for teaching me, for keeping the light burning until I could arrive. "Thank you," Agnes replied, "for being brave enough to accept the duty. Not every Ashford woman has. I've read the journals, some ran, some tried to burn the house down, some—" She paused, her expression darkening. "Some made bargains. Let the darkness out in exchange for power or wealth or love. It never ended well." After Agnes departed, Eleanor was truly alone for the first time since arriving at Greystone Manor. The house seemed to grow larger in her solitude, its hallways stretching longer, its shadows deepening. But she fell into the work with grim determination. Each evening at dusk, she began her rounds, starting in the cellar, where the darkness was always strongest, seeping up from the earth itself. She lit the candles placed at cardinal points, spoke the protective words, and felt the space brighten and warm in response. Then upward, floor by floor, room by room, until every corner of Greystone Manor blazed with defiant light. The sealed room at the end of the second-floor hallway remained untouched. Eleanor followed Agnes's advice and entered only once a month, on the dark of the moon, to refresh the wards painted on its floor. Those visits were ordeals that left her shaking and sick. The darkness was concentrated there, pressing against the symbols like water against a dam. Standing in that room felt like drowning in ink, like being buried alive in shadows that had weight and hunger. But she did it. Because Ashford women didn't run from their duties, the journals became her companions during the long days. She read them all. 5 generations of Ashford women documenting their vigils, their fears, their small victories and terrible defeats. She learned that the darkness had broken free twice in the family's history. Once in 1789, when Eleanor's great-great-grandmother had died suddenly, and the house stood empty for 3 weeks. 17 people in the nearby village died in their sleep, their bodies found unmarked, but their faces twisted in terror. The darkness had fed well before the next Ashford woman arrived to cage it again. The second time was in 1843, when Eleanor's great-aunt had fallen in love with a farmer from the village and tried to leave her duty behind. She'd blown out all the candles and walked out the door with her beloved. They'd made it 5 miles before the darkness caught them. The farmer's body was found torn apart. The aunt had crawled back to Greystone Manor, relit the candles with her dying breath, and bled out in the hallway. Her journal entry from the night before was a single line, "Love is not worth the world." I should have remembered that. Eleanor read these accounts by firelight, candle close at hand, and understood the weight she carried. This wasn't just about her survival, or even her family's legacy. Thousands of lives depended on her keeping the light burning. 3 months into her vigil, on a night when sleet hammered the windows like gravel thrown by angry fists, Eleanor encountered something new. She was making her midnight rounds, moving through the second-floor bedrooms, when she saw a figure standing in the hallway. Not a shadow or a trick of the light, but a solid, substantial shape. A man, tall and lean, with dark hair and eyes that reflected the candlelight like an animal's. Eleanor's hand tightened on her candle. "Who are you? How did you get in here?" The man smiled, and there was something wrong about it. Too wide, too many teeth. "I've always been here, Miss Ashford, or perhaps I should say I've always been beneath here, waiting, watching. You've been very diligent these past months. I thought it time we met properly." The candle flame in Eleanor's hand turned ice-cold, frost forming on the brass holder. She wanted to run, but forced herself to stand her ground. "You're the darkness, given form." "I'm one face of it," the man agreed, his voice pleasant, conversational. "The darkness has many faces, many voices. I thought you might prefer this one. I modeled it after a portrait I saw in one of your journals, a young man your great-grandmother once loved. Handsome, isn't it?" Eleanor's heart hammered, but her voice came out steady. "What do you want?" "What I've always wanted, freedom, release, to flow out across this land and feed on fear and despair until I'm strong enough to spread further, to cover cities, countries, the world." He took a step closer, and Eleanor forced herself not to retreat. "But I'm tired of waiting. And you're so young to carry such a burden, so alone." "I'm not alone," Eleanor said. "I have the light." The man's laugh was soft, almost kind. "The light, yes. That stubborn little flame you carry. Do you know how many Ashford women I've watched burn out, Eleanor? How many started so brave, so determined, only to slowly crumble under the weight of duty, the loneliness, the knowledge that the world goes on beyond these walls while you remain trapped, a prisoner to obligation." He was close enough now that Eleanor could see the wrongness in detail. His eyes had no whites, just endless depth. His shadow didn't match his form, and when he breathed, frost spread across the wallpaper in fractal patterns. "I could give you freedom," he whispered. "Open the sealed door. Let me out. In exchange, I'll give you whatever you desire. Love, a family, the life your aunt stole from you when she sent you away. You could have everything, Eleanor. You deserve everything. All you have to do is blow out the candle." For a heartbeat, Eleanor felt the temptation like a physical force, to be free of this burden, to have the life she'd dreamed about during those gray London years, to not be alone anymore. Then she thought of the farmer's torn body, the 17 villagers dead in their sleep, the aunt who'd crawled back bleeding to seal the darkness again. "No," Eleanor said. Her candle flame suddenly roared upward, bright as a star, driving the darkness man backward. "I know what you are, your hunger and emptiness, wearing a pleasant face. And I know what I am. I'm an Ashford woman. I'm the light that will not go out." The man's face twisted, beauty melting into something ancient and terrible. His voice became a chorus, 100 throats screaming in unison. "You will break. They all break eventually. I am patient. I am eternal. Your flame will gutter and die, and I will be free." "Maybe," Eleanor said, surprised by her own calmness. "Maybe I will break. Maybe in 10 years or 20 or 30 I'll grow weak. But not tonight. Not while I draw breath. Not while I can hold this candle." She walked forward, and the darkness man retreated before her, dissolving into shadows that fled from her light. Eleanor continued her rounds, lighting candles with shaking hands, but her heart was steel. Spring came late to Devon that year, but when it finally arrived, it brought changes. Eleanor had begun to feel restless, confined by the house's walls. She understood the duty, accepted it, but Agnes's words haunted her. "You become a prisoner to obligation." On a warm April afternoon, Eleanor made a decision. She dressed in her best clothes, freshly laundered, repaired at the seams, and walked the 3 miles to the village of Ashford Cross. It was the first time she'd left Greystone Manor since arriving 5 months ago. The village was small, perhaps 300 souls, built around a crossroads and a market square. Eleanor felt their eyes on her as she walked through. Curiosity mixed with something else. Recognition, perhaps. The Ashfords were known here, their manor visible on the hill, their duty whispered about in the way country folk whispered about old magic. She went to the church first, to the cemetery where her aunt was buried. The grave was simple, marked with a plain stone, Margaretta Ashford, 1825 to 1895. She kept the light burning. "I understand now," Eleanor said softly, kneeling beside the marker. "Why you sent me away. Why you wanted me to have a chance at normalcy. Thank you for that. And thank you for calling me back when the time was right. I won't fail you." A voice spoke behind her. "You're the new Ashford woman, then?" Eleanor turned to find an old priest watching her, his weathered face kind. "I am. Eleanor Ashford. Father Michael Sullivan." He gestured to the grave. "I gave Margaretta her last rites. She spoke of you at the end. Said you were stronger than you knew. Said the house would test you, but you'd hold." He studied Eleanor with sharp eyes. "Have you been tested?" "Every night," Eleanor admitted. "And you've held? So far?" Father Sullivan nodded slowly. "The church, we don't speak of such things officially. Old magics, pagan wards. But I've been priest here for 30 years, and I've seen enough to know that there are things in this world that exist in the spaces between prayers, things that your family has kept at bay while the rest of us sleep safely." He reached into his robes and pulled out a small silver cross on a chain. "This won't stop the darkness. I suspect you have better tools for that. But it might bring you comfort in the long hours. A reminder that you don't fight alone, even if it sometimes feels that way." Eleanor accepted the cross with trembling hands. "Thank you, Father. Thank you, Miss Ashford, for what you do, for what you sacrifice. We may not speak of it openly, but the village knows. We remember." Over the following weeks, Eleanor returned to the village regularly. She met the shopkeepers, the farmers, the families who lived their ordinary lives, unaware of the extraordinary darkness held back by one woman's vigil. But some knew. Some remembered. They would nod to her respectfully, slip extra bread into her basket without charging, leave bundles of herbs on her doorstep with no note attached. She wasn't alone. Not truly. The village supported her in quiet ways, honoring the unspoken contract between the Ashfords and the community they protected. But the visits came with a cost. Each time Eleanor left Greystone Manor, even for a few hours, she could feel the darkness testing the boundaries. It pushed against the wards, seeking cracks, growing bolder. She began to limit her excursions, then stopped them altogether when she returned one evening to find candles mysteriously extinguished in the sealed room, the wards weakened. The darkness was learning her patterns, exploiting any absence. Summer brought a crisis. A terrible drought gripped Devon, turning streams to dust and fields to brown waste. The village suffered, crops failing, animals dying, and people began to whisper that the Ashfords were to blame, that the darkness in the manor was poisoning the land. A delegation came to her door one August afternoon. 5 men from the village, faces hard with desperation and fear. "Miss Ashford," their leader said, a farmer named Thomas Blackwell, whom Eleanor had met in the market. "We mean no disrespect, but things can't continue as they are. The land is dying. Our children are starving. Some say," he paused, uncomfortable, "some say you should let whatever's in that house free. That keeping it caged is making things worse." Eleanor felt ice in her veins despite the summer heat. "Mr. Blackwell, I understand. You're suffering, but you don't understand what you're asking. The darkness in Greystone Manor doesn't cause drought. It causes death. If I let it free, your children won't starve. They'll die screaming in their beds. So you say, another man spoke up, younger, angry. But all we know is the Ashfords have kept to that manner for generations, and our land has grown poorer. Maybe it's time for a change. Eleanor saw the crowd behind them, villagers with torches and tools, desperation making them dangerous. For a moment she considered her options. She could fight, use the wards she'd learned to protect herself. Or she could try to make them understand. She chose understanding. "Come with me," she said. "5 of you. I'll show you what I'm protecting you from. But you must follow my instructions exactly. Carry candles. Don't speak once we're inside. And no matter what you see or hear, don't blow out your light." She led them through Greystone Manor as evening fell, showing them the candles burning in every room, the symbols on floors and walls, the journals documenting generations of vigil. She brought them to the sealed door at the end of the second-floor hallway and let them feel the cold radiating from it, the sense of wrongness that made their skin crawl. "In that room," Eleanor said quietly, "is the strongest point of the darkness's intrusion. It presses against the wards every moment, seeking any weakness. If I were to unseal that door right now, this is what would happen." She spoke a single word, not one of unbinding, but one that momentarily thinned the wards. Just enough. The temperature plummeted. Frost spread across the walls, and from beyond the door came a sound that drove the men to their knees, a terrible, hungry howling that seemed to come from the foundations of the world itself. In that moment, they all saw it, shadows seeping under the door like smoke, reaching for them with fingers made of absence and void. Eleanor spoke the word of strengthening, and the wards snapped back into place. The howling cut off. The shadows retreated. The men fled, stumbling down the stairs in their haste. Only Thomas Blackwell remained, his face pale but steady. "God have mercy," he whispered. "All these years we had no idea. My family wanted it that way," Eleanor said. "The fewer people who knew, the fewer the darkness could potentially use. But you need to make them understand, Mr. Blackwell. The drought is terrible, but it's natural. What's in that room? That's something else entirely." Thomas nodded slowly. "I'll tell them. I'll make them understand." He met her eyes, and she saw respect there and pity. "But Miss Ashford, this is your life now, isn't it? All day, every day, until you die." Eleanor thought about the journals, about her aunt's lonely decades, about Agnes's 30 years of service. "Yes, this is my life." "That seems a terrible fate for one so young." "Perhaps," Eleanor agreed. "But it's necessary, and I've learned something these past months, Mr. Blackwell. The darkness outside these walls, poverty, loneliness, despair, it consumes people just as surely as what's in that room. At least here, my suffering has purpose. I keep the light burning, and people live." "That's not such a terrible fate." After the delegation left, Eleanor sat in the drawing room and stared at her candle, the one that never burned down. That had been her constant companion for 7 months. She thought about purpose and sacrifice, about duty and freedom. She thought about the choice she'd made to stay, to accept the burden. And she realized something. She wasn't trapped here. She'd chosen this. Every night she lit the candles. Every time she walked the halls and pushed back the darkness, it was a choice. She could leave, could blow out the candles and run. Others had. But she didn't, because some lights refused to be extinguished, no matter how fierce the darkness. The rains finally came in September, breaking the drought. The village prospered again, and with prosperity came gratitude. They brought offerings to Greystone Manor, food, cloth, candles. They helped Eleanor repair the roof and clear the overgrown garden. They didn't speak of what the delegation had seen, but the knowledge spread in whispers. The Ashford woman was keeping them safe, and they would help her bear the burden. Winter returned, and with it the long nights. But Eleanor was stronger now, more practiced. She'd learned to read the darkness's moods, to anticipate its attacks. She developed a routine that sustained her, rising at noon, working in the garden or reading during the afternoon, preparing for the night's vigil as dusk approached. She found moments of joy in small things. The first spring flowers pushing through frozen ground, the taste of fresh bread from the village baker, the satisfaction of a night walked without incident, all candles burning bright, all wards holding firm. And the journals. She began keeping her own, adding to the generations of documentation. But where her predecessors had written mostly of fear, and burden. Eleanor tried to record hope as well. The good days, the kindnesses from villagers, the beauty of Greystone Manor when viewed in the right light. One February night, almost exactly a year after her arrival, Eleanor faced her greatest test. The darkness had been building its strength for weeks. She could feel it. The air grew thicker, the shadows more solid, the whispers more insistent. On the night of the new moon, when the darkness was always strongest, it struck with everything it had. Eleanor was in the sealed room, refreshing the monthly wards, when the candles all around her suddenly guttered. Not from wind. There was no wind, but from sheer force of will on the other side. The darkness wanted out. Eleanor's own candle remained lit, but barely. The flame shrank to a pinpoint, struggling against the crushing pressure of the dark. She could feel it all around her, a physical weight trying to squeeze the breath from her lungs, the light from her candle. And then it spoke. Not in her parents' voices this time, but in her own. "You're so tired, Eleanor. So alone. You've been carrying this burden for a year, and you have decades left. Decades of the same routine, the same lonely vigil. Wouldn't it be easier to just let go, to sleep? The candle wants to go out. You can feel it. Stop fighting. Stop holding on. Just let the darkness win." Eleanor fell to her knees, the candle shaking in her hand. The voice was right. She was tired, so desperately tired. And the darkness was patient, eternal. What was one woman's will against something that had existed since before light itself? But then Eleanor thought of the village, sleeping peacefully in their beds. She thought of children who would die screaming if she failed. She thought of her aunt, of Agnes, of all the Ashford women who'd stood in this very room and faced this same moment of crisis. They'd held, and so would she. "No," Eleanor gasped, forcing herself to stand. "No, you're wrong about one thing. The candle doesn't want to go out, because I don't want it to go out. And my will is bound into this flame." She walked forward, toward the center of the room where the darkness was thickest. Every step was agony, like wading through deep water. But she moved anyway, holding her candle high. "I am Eleanor Ashford," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Daughter of William and Margaret, niece of Margaretta. I am the keeper of the light, and I will not fail." She reached the center of the room and slammed her candle down into the primary ward circle. Light exploded outward, brilliant and pure, driving the darkness back to the edges of the room. Eleanor didn't stop. She pulled her prepared candles from her apron and moved around the circle, lighting each one, speaking the words of binding and protection. The darkness shrieked and raged, but it couldn't touch her. Her will was iron, her purpose absolute. By the time dawn broke, Eleanor had reinforced every ward in the room. The darkness was sealed tighter than it had been in decades, pushed back by sheer force of determined light. She emerged from the sealed room exhausted but triumphant, and in her hand her candle burned bright and steady, its flame untouched. The darkness tried other attacks over the following months, but never again with such force. Eleanor had proven herself, demonstrated the strength of her will. The house accepted her fully now. She could feel it in the way the boards didn't creak quite as ominously, in the way the shadows retreated more readily from her light. Spring came again, bringing new growth to the garden Eleanor had cultivated. She'd learned to grow the herbs needed for the protective candles, to harvest salt from the cliffs herself, to be self-sufficient in her vigil. One warm May afternoon, she received an unexpected visitor. A young woman, perhaps 20, with Eleanor's dark curls and determined chin. "Miss Ashford?" the woman said hesitantly. "I'm Catherine Ashford. Your second cousin, I believe. My grandmother was your aunt's sister. I heard about the manor, about what you do here. I wanted to meet you." Eleanor invited her in for tea, and they sat in the drawing room, bright with afternoon sun, and talked. Catherine spoke of growing up hearing whispers about the family duty, about the strange Ashford women who lived alone in the old manor. She'd been curious, wanted to understand. "Do you ever regret it?" Catherine asked. "Accepting this burden?" Eleanor considered the question carefully. She thought about the lonely nights, the constant vigilance, the life she'd never have. But she also thought about purpose and meaning, about the weight of carrying something important. "Regret is a luxury I can't afford," Eleanor said finally. "I made a choice, and I stand by it. Is it hard? Yes. Lonely? Sometimes unbearably so. But it matters. That's more than most people can say about their lives. Catherine stayed for 3 days, and Eleanor taught her the basics of the vigil. Not because she planned to pass on the duty. Catherine had her own life to live, but because knowledge shouldn't die with her. If something happened to Eleanor, someone needed to be able to step in, even temporarily. When Catherine left, she hugged Eleanor tightly. "You're braver than you know," she whispered. "And you're not alone. I'll visit when I can, and I'll tell the family, those who'll listen, about what you do, about the light you keep burning." After Catherine departed, Eleanor returned to her routine. But something had shifted. She wasn't just a solitary keeper now. She was part of a lineage, a tradition. Other Ashfords knew and remembered. The village supported her. She was a single candle, yes, but reflected in countless others. Years passed. The vigil continued. The darkness tested her regularly, but Eleanor held firm. She aged. 30 became 35, became 40. But her will remained unbroken. Her candle burned as bright as ever. She filled journal after journal with observations, improvements to the wards, techniques for fighting the darkness. Future keepers would have her knowledge to draw on, as she'd drawn on her aunt's. Catherine visited twice a year, bringing news of the world beyond Greystone Manor. Eleanor learned of wars and peace, of inventions and changes, of the world turning while she remained constant. She felt the passage of time not in the world's changes, but in the steady accumulation of her own experience. On the 15th anniversary of her arrival at Greystone Manor, Eleanor stood in the sealed room during her monthly ward reinforcement. The darkness pressed against its prison as always, but without the same frantic hunger. It had learned after 15 years that she wouldn't break. "I suppose we've reached an understanding, haven't we?" Eleanor said to the dark. "You push, I hold. You whisper, I refuse. We could continue this dance for decades more." The darkness didn't respond. It never did anymore. Not after that terrible night of the new moon in her first year. But Eleanor felt its presence, eternal and patient. "I want you to know something," she continued, speaking to the dark as she refreshed the wards. "You taught me what I was capable of. Every test you threw at me made me stronger. Every whispered temptation I resisted proved to me that my will was solid. So in a strange way, I should thank you." She lit the last candle in the ward circle and stood, her joints creaking slightly. 42 years old, her body starting to show the wear of constant vigilance. But her spirit was stronger than ever. "I am Eleanor Ashford," she said, the words a ritual now, a centering meditation. "I am the keeper of the light, and I will not fail." As she left the sealed room and walked the familiar hallways of Greystone Manor, candle in hand, Eleanor thought about legacy and meaning. She would never marry, never have children of her own. Her life would be consumed by this duty, just as her aunt's had been, and Agnes's and the Ashford women before them. But when she died, decades from now, she hoped, she would leave behind something important. Journals filled with knowledge, wards stronger than they'd ever been, a tradition of vigilance passed down and strengthened, and a village that slept safely because one woman chose to keep the light burning. Some lights, Eleanor had learned, refuse to be extinguished. Not because they're inherently stronger than the darkness, but because the hand holding them refuses to let go. Because duty and purpose and stubborn will can sustain a flame through any storm. As night fell over Greystone Manor, Eleanor began her evening rounds. Room by room, candle by candle, she pushed back the dark. Her flame never wavered, never diminished, never went out. And in the village below, in the countryside beyond, in the world that would never know her name or understand her sacrifice, people lived. They loved and laughed and dreamed, protected by a light they couldn't see, kept safe by a woman they would never meet. That was enough. That was everything. Eleanor Ashford, keeper of the light, walked through her house and into legend, the candle in her hand burning bright against the endless dark. A small flame, perhaps, but one that refused to be extinguished. And in that refusal, in that stubborn, magnificent choice to keep burning no matter what, there was a truth that transcended fear, that even the deepest darkness cannot survive against a single light that will not go out. Sometimes the greatest battles are fought in silence, by unknown soldiers holding unbreakable lines. This is their story. This is the story of every person who chooses to keep their light burning when surrendering to the dark would be so much easier. We are all keepers of light in our own way, fighting our own darkness, and the world survives because we refuse to let our flames go out.